Welcome to another installment of the REINS Spotlight series, where we talk with the nation's top infrastructure leaders. Our guest today is Wiatt Bowers, AICP. Wiatt is a certified transportation and land use planner with over 25 years of experience. Along with being a project director at Atkins, he's also the president of the Florida chapter of the American Planning Association. Earned a bachelor's degree in communications from Temple University and a master's degree in urban and regional planning from Florida State University. Wiatt, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
So looking back to where you are now, do you feel that maybe if you could do it again, you would maybe go do a major in geography or some type of planning kind of degree, and would that have helped you, or not that big of a deal?
I don't think it's that big of a deal. Most of the urban planning programs are graduate level, and so having some sort of diverse undergraduate background is very helpful, whether that's in traditional liberal arts or engineering or architecture, or in my case, communications. I think it's helpful in learning how to speak, how to be able to present in public, which has been very useful in my planning career. I would say if I were going back and doing it again, and this is kind of the ideal, while I'm a transportation planner primarily, I love urban design. And that's kind of the cross between planning and architecture. And so there are fewer urban design oriented programs around the country, but maybe if I were doing it again, that's something I would look to do different.
Now, along with being involved in your day-to-day, your 9 to 5, you also do charity work and you give back, like by participating in Transform Jacks. Can you tell us a little bit about your passion to give back and how you feel planners can improve quality of life in urban areas?
So, I think my passion for community service and giving back starts at home, and it started with my parents, and a strong religious background in Judaism, in giving back and healing the world, and that it's, I think, and I'll probably get this phrase wrong, but it's not our job to fix everything, but it is our job to try to take a step. And so there's a part of that. And then, but within planning, it's in our code of ethics, in giving back to the community and giving back to future planners, and mentoring. And so it's something that I've done throughout my career. But it's also important, as everyday issues happen in our in the community that you live in, that you get engaged in them. And sometimes there's a careful balance of how that works with your primary job, and maybe there's sometimes a conflict of interest, and you have to think about it. But I think that, again, if you look to the code of ethics, responsibility to the community is paramount. It's at the top. I put my money where my mouth is. When I moved to Jacksonville, I chose very clearly to live in downtown. I wanted to live in the urban core. And so I was looking at downtown and only those surrounding neighborhoods that were right adjacent to it. I'm still really proud of the decision that I made, and would not change that.
Florida, when it comes to transportation and land use planning, presents some unique challenges in terms of the wetlands, the water, the beaches, etc. What are planners in Florida, such as yourself, doing to mitigate effects when it comes to climate change and how it affects planning?
So that's a really interesting question. And Florida is definitely at the forefront. We have more coastline than most every other state, and it's where the majority of our population lives, near the coast. So when we're thinking about climate change and sea level rise, for example, there's all kinds of directives at the state level in the past to not allow for densification along the coast, for example. That said, if I go down to Miami and I say, what's the most vibrant community in that area, it's Miami Beach. And so when I'm thinking about urban planning and vibrancy and density, and by the way, the most multimodal part of the state of Florida, those happen. So sometimes these things intersect, and trying to find that careful balance is really key. So for example, something that Miami Beach has been doing is raising up their streets a couple of feet. And now that does have its own issues, again, especially with density, in terms of what does that mean for the building and the front door, is that now below street level? And how do you work from that? we're also looking to try and be as renewable as possible with energy, which hopefully will help with climate change in the long run. And that means, again, more focus on what we used to call alternative transportation. I'll say multimodal or active transportation, whether that be bicycle, pedestrian, and transit modes.
In a 2019 interview, you were quoted as saying that congestion is good for cities. Now, I'm not an expert like yourself, but to me that seems counter to what we want. So I'd love to hear about what you meant by that, if you could expand on that a little bit.
So quite often, for example, when we're running transportation travel demand modeling, we look at the faster the cars are going, for example, then there's less travel time and there's less emissions, and so that's good from an environmental standpoint. However, it has put us in this vicious circle of continually having more and more vehicular travel, leading to wider and wider roads in order to accommodate that, or maybe not just wider roads, but longer distances. So for example, if the average person says, my commute is 30 minutes, and that's the number that I'm most comfortable with. 30 minutes 100 years ago meant 2 miles, or something like that. And 30 minutes now, if you have full freeway, means 25 to 30 miles. When I say congestion is good for cities, if I said, what are some of the most vibrant, economically powerful cities in the United States, people might say New York, San Francisco, Boston, Chicago, Philadelphia. And if I said, what are some of the most congested cities in the United States, you would probably give me the same list. The fact is, congestion is a sign of economic vitality and vibrancy. That's what our cities are all about. Congestion from a highway standpoint might also provide a really great opportunity for people to either work closer to home, walking and biking, or taking transit, which helps. Now, I will say that was a 2019 comment, and the entire world flipped on its end this past year. And I don't know that we have yet to figure out exactly what the new paradigm is coming out of COVID, and how many people are actually going to go back into work. For example, the folks who had 90-minute commutes in New York City, are they going to go back into Manhattan in some cases? And if so, how many days a week?
Pivot to your role at the Florida chapter of the American Planning Association.
Sure.
First of all, I want to congratulate you. Your chapter was recognized for leadership within with the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee. So first of all, I wanted to ask, how did you make that happen? And then we'll drill a little bit more into that.
The Chapter 1 award from National APA is basically the outstanding chapter of the year among I think there's 46 or 47 chapters, not, some of the states are combined. So there's about, like I said, 46, 47. We got the outstanding chapter of the year for two things. Number one, our EDI, our equity, diversity, and inclusion efforts, and two, some of our efforts in legislative policy. Now, I was serving as president-elect during the past year that I guess the award is based on. So the majority of the credit goes to our now immediate past president, Laura Everett, who was president at the time, in setting up our statewide EDI committee. And those folks really deserve all of the credit for everything that they've done. Now, like I said, the second half of that was legislative advocacy, and one of the roles I had as president-elect is to chair our legislative policy committee. And so under that, I really pushed for us to start doing basically what amounts to like a Planners Day on the Hill, which is what you do at a national level. We ended up calling it Planners Month in the districts. And the idea was that you would actually go to talk to your legislator in their district before they got to Tallahassee, because really that's when you can have the most effect, is before the legislation is written and before the whole committee process gets going. Now, obviously, again, in COVID world, we were not able to do those meetings in person. We did them just like this over Zoom. But it was a great first year effort, and we intend to keep going with that annually.
Been vocal and highlighted in the news for some, voicing, controversial projects like tearing down elevated ramps to transform a road in the downtown area. How do you balance being a consultant, voicing your own opinion, and potentially being in conflict with a client?
It's a really tough one, and I would admit that there are times when I probably haven't done the greatest job of finding that balance. I will tell you, in that specific instance, we're talking about highway bridge ramps in Jacksonville. Actually thought of the idea of bringing down those ramps about 10 to 15 years ago. So when the opportunity came through some development proposals in the stadium area to bring down the ramps, at least in part, I stood up and supported it. And I didn't think it was going to be much of a conflict, because in this case, the client that was doing a lot of that work was the city of Jacksonville with the Florida Department of Transportation, which is one of our biggest clients. I will say that it's a careful balance. And like I said, I'm not sure that I've done it well always, but I also think, again, from my own personal experience, and also, like I said earlier, the code of ethics, that standing up for the community is the most important thing. And I think this is true with many of my clients, that they respect that I do that.
Been involved in some legislative advocacy. We are in the midst of a national infrastructure negotiation. I was wondering, we'd love to hear from you. What do you feel needs to be in the bill? If it was up to you, what would you put in it?
Transportation component, the part of infrastructure, the transportation that I've focused on, is pretty good. A couple things. Number one, it helps move us into the future, enhancing safety efforts and complete streets, and actually having a call out for those, and a strong call out for active transportation. I will say, I think the biggest thing that's in there that I think needs to make sure it stays in there, providing more autonomy, for lack of a better term, to local governments and metropolitan planning, I think is a very key part that is in the bill that needs to stay in there.
Employment of urban and regional planners is projected to go 10% over the next decade, with population increases and emphasis on smart cities. Do you think these will drive employment growth in planning?
The field has grown in non-traditional ways. For example, we have lots of architects that do planning and don't necessarily have planning degrees. We have lots of transportation engineers who are doing planning and doing it with an engineering degree. And with things like, say, the increase of citizen planners, folks that are just, really interested in their communities, that's where I think the growth is. I'm not trying to discourage anyone from going to graduate school, because I think it has incredible value, but it may be that growth is in on the fringes, for the lack of a better term. And when you talk about smart cities, for example, does planning all of a sudden have a whole bunch of people with coding experience, which has not traditionally been a planning focus? And how do we bring in the folks that are in environmental sciences and other sustainability fields? So I think that's the wonderful thing about planning, is it's really kind of hard you can't pigeonhole it. You can't put it in a box. It's so broad. So I think when you think about that, the field itself may expand, that's where the growth potential is. It's in diversification.
I know this is a large way of just saying, what advice do you give to college students, young professionals, to be successful in the field?
And society as a whole is all about compromise. So finding those wins and finding those places where you can get even just a small win.
Wonderful. So internships, patience, and compromise. I think those are wise words and can apply to almost any field. One thing, speaking of football, where football and planning kind of intersect, Lot J in Jacksonville, is that how? Yeah, that's. Do you, any thoughts on Lot J?
That connection between sports and planning, it really happens for me in baseball.
Okay.
And so I go exploring, and I just did it this weekend. I think that the idea of creating these entertainment complexes that are with stadiums makes a ton of sense. When it comes to urban development, I would say that clustering is a really key component. And right now, at least, the challenge of our stadium area is it's more than a mile from the majority of the urban core. eventually bringing those pieces together. And that's why, again, building a boulevard that connected those pieces together over time would have made sense. But I just don't know that the Lot J plan was just quite ripe yet.
Yeah, appreciate you coming on.
Yes, thank you. I appreciated the opportunity and love what you guys are doing with REINS. And I think it's serving a wonderful purpose for those people coming into the field, as well as those of us who've been in the field for a number of years. So thank you.
Stay tuned for more interviews in the REINS Spotlight series, and be sure to follow the REINS app on our social media platforms. Thanks.